this is Kate from Generate Magic, and so often we make situations way more difficult than they need to be. And case in point, I was in two long-term relationships where I was absolutely miserable for a majority of the time. But in both cases, I thought and I had plenty of opportunities to exit the relationship on top of that, but I allowed it to drag out and continue for a variety of reasons. And I think part of it was feeling, fear of being alone, feeling that I really didn't deserve happiness. And so instead of choosing to play the role of the martyr, but I think the biggest thing is that feeling the sense that I had to prove myself, and that if I allowed it to end, then that would be confirmation that I had somehow failed. And on top of that, both of these individuals were giving me reasons, right, directly for why they were unhappy with me and with the relationship. And so that to me was kind of, just like direct evidence that I was a failure. So I felt like I had to stick it out and that I had to prove myself somehow and prove that I could make this work. And similarly, I've been in jobs where it clearly wasn't a good fit at all. Like I was clearly in over my head and it just wasn't a good match. But in both cases, or in all those cases, right, I felt like I had to stick it out. And once again, that I had to prove myself, and that if I were to let the situation fall away, if I were to exit the situation, that it would mean that I was a failure. And in one of these situations, it was actually a restaurant job, and I got the job through a friend, and so part of me felt like I would let her down, or that I would somehow embarrass her, because here I got the job because of her. She basically recommended me, and then if I were to leave, it would be a poor reflection on her, and it would make her look bad. And on top of that, she would be disappointed in me as well, because she had gone out of her way to get me this job. And it was a waitressing job. And the previous restaurant where I had been a waitress, it was a really tiny restaurant where literally you just had to turn around and you could practically touch all the tables in the restaurant. And it was a very tiny restaurant. And all of a sudden I was placed in this very popular diner in Los Angeles where it was much bigger. And almost immediately I was given, I think, like 7 tables. And right off the bat, like on my first hour on the job, and I was just way over my head and just never really kind of had the right mentality for that type of job. Like I would get flustered, I would get stressed out, and some people work really well under pressure, but I was the opposite. And I would just make all kinds of mistakes and just get really like anxious. And so it was just clear that I was not a good match for this job, and I was not happy in this job at all, and nobody else was happy with me on top of it. It was not a good situation for anybody. Like with these relationships, right? It was not a win-win scenario for anybody that was involved. But again, I kept thinking that I had to stick it out, that I had to somehow prove myself. And I know it's probably not verbatim, but a quote from the author of Realitytransurfing, who's Zealand, whose first name is escaping me at the moment, but he has this quote about exiting the, instead of just staying in, trying constantly to prove yourself, just leave the courtroom. And it just kind of makes things so much easier. And similarly, this is another reality transurfing concept, that instead of just like I always, in all these situations, I felt like I was just stuck in a bad movie and I just had to stick it through until the end. And so instead of trying to change the script, or instead of trying to kind of like change things, or trying to effort and struggle, and just choosing a new script entirely. And so in both of in all these situations, with these jobs and with these relationships, I realized I could make it much easier on myself. And, or rather, I didn't realize that at the moment, but it was in retrospect, after I left these situations, I was like, wow, I was making this way harder on myself than it really needed to be. And so, yeah, so it's not a matter of trying to change the situation or trying to stick it out. It's a matter of simply choosing again. And yeah, and as always, you know, there's a larger message, and it's always about the bigger picture, right? And it isn't necessarily, and the message isn't necessarily to end the relationship or to leave the job, but rather it's simply, yeah, just not to make things more difficult than they need to be. And in my case, the sole reason that I was staying in those relationships and in those jobs was because I was trying to prove myself. It's not because I was happy or fulfilled, and I certainly was not making the other people involved happy. It was just not a good scenario for anybody involved. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, and I've talked to a lot of people, right, who have just been in these situations where they just feel stuck in a scenario where they're not happy at all, and just recognizing that you always have a choice, and you never have, yeah, you never have to stay in a situation where you feel like it's not serving you and you feel like it's not serving the higher good. And if you exit a situation, it's a no sense of reflection on you, or the message is not that you're a failure at all. And in fact, I think I recognized that I was actually in recognizing that it was time to leave these situations, that was the success, and choosing my own happiness, that was the success. And in the case of this particular restaurant job, I actually did not choose to leave the situation, but I was actually told by the owner of the restaurant. She said, well, first of all, she had already kind of given me several reprimands, and then at one point she said she was going to give me one final chance. And then the next day, very first table that I got, you know, it was a super complicated order, and they kept changing it and kept making all these really different specifications, and so I ended up messing up the order. And I kind of knew at that point what was coming. And so sure enough, at the end of the day, I asked her what time I needed to come in the next day, and she told me, she just said, I don't think it's going to work out. I remember there was such a flood of relief that I didn't have to do this anymore. And so yeah, so I think it's just this sense of like trying to prove myself, trying to be a martyr, trying to be this strong, independent woman, offering all these times where I had opportunities to either ask for help or people offer me support, and I refused it because I thought it would mean that I was a failure or that I was a loser if I were to accept the support. And realizing, yeah, that there's nothing really to prove, that in the eyes of God and in the eyes of the divine, that you're already perfect and whole and complete, and that this love is unconditional, and there's just nothing to prove. And always choosing your happiness and choosing your fulfillment in every moment is what's going to serve not only you, but everybody around you as well, right? Because then when you're in your joy and fulfillment, you start to bring others up, and you help others to shine by your very example. And so that's the message that I want to leave you with today. And yeah, certainly in life, right, that you're going to encounter challenges and setbacks for sure, but it never, you know, there's certainly ways that we can make it easier for ourselves, right? And it's never about trying to prove yourself. And because once again, in the eyes of God, you're already loved and you're already worthy exactly as you are. So with that, thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.